Hello, everyone, and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host, Code Marvelous, and today I am joined by V from the Source Podcast.
Howdy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for coming on, V.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so V and I are going to go over a Whizzard deck that has a recent archetype. But before we get into that, V, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got into Netrunner and, starting the Source podcast and, tell me a little bit about your Netrunner story.
Yeah, sure. I got into the game around whenever Creation and Control came out. I read like this review from Sit Down, whatever, Set Up and
Shut
Shut
up and
Down.
sit down.
That's it. Yeah. Quinn's, he's like kind of big in the Netrunner community now. I read his review and it just super duper sold me. And then there was a group in my area and kind of just went from there. I didn't really play competitively very much though until maybe the end of 2014 or so. I
Okay.
went to Florida, got their first regionals, which I think also kind of pushed me into it. And that's where I met co-host Stephen Ball in the Source. We met in the cut of that regionals, and we just really hit it off. And one day he offered, like, try doing a podcast, and yeah, that's how that started.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. And yeah, you guys do some really quality content. If you guys don't, people watching at home, I can't imagine if you're watching my stuff, you probably know about The Source. But if you don't, check it out. The Source podcast. They have a lot of interesting, like, episodic interviews that you guys will often splice together to make episodes and interesting discussions about a lot of different topics, which is really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're talking about Wiz, but more specifically, before we actually really get into that, let's talk about kind of the key card that this deck is built around. So we have Frantic Coding,
Uh,
and Frantic Coding is a really weird card from a
yeah,
very weird identity that we've got going on right now.
yeah,
So
definitely.
talk to me a little bit about what we're doing here with Frantic Coding and why this has got some power to it um, in this deck.
Yeah, sure thing. So, okay, yeah, it's on the screen there. So, yeah, when I first read this, I was like, that seems like kind of ridiculous. Like, destroying 10 cards of your deck is obviously, not exactly what you want to do. Like, you think about a lot of really good games you've had, and you probably had to use like almost every single card in your whole deck. So, like, you're losing some value out of your deck when you play this.
Right.
But I think right now, like, Temujin Wiz already has so much money, and, that archetype it just can be so rich too, like if it can get going quickly. And I think that's kind of the key in this card, is that combined with the Conspiracy Breakers, which is Black Orchestra, MK Ultra, and Paperclip, which are all now out, they install from the heap, like when you encounter the correct ice type. So I think like, this one is like, okay, let me find my Yogg, I install it for free, and I also put maybe Paperclip in the bin. So now I'm getting over two different types of gear checks that might be like prohibiting me from cashing out my Temujin contracts and building up medium counters and doing the things I need to do to win the game.
Right. And the other thing that I think is really neat about this card is this is super like Order and Chaos era like Anarch thematic, where it's just like you're gonna get something really good, but at a terrible cost.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like it feels a lot like an inject to me.
Yeah, it's
Um,
similar to Inject. It's also, I feel like it's really similar to playing Max, just like in a big burst.
yeah, that's another really good way of looking at it. And we are playing Anarch, so we have a lot of ways to get stuff out of the trash once it's there.
Yeah, you have the best recursion card in the game, which is this Deja Vu. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Can get you whatever you want. And then it's like, oh, and if it's a virus, which is some of the best cards like Parasite, you can get two of them.
Yeah, seems good. Seems all right.
Yeah.
So Frantic Coding, interesting card, good card, and it's the linchpin of this deck. It's
Yep.
out of Whizzard. There's a bunch of meta reasons to play Whizzard that V and I were discussing before making this video. The nature of Corp economy and a lot of the core Corp strategies. 3 recurring credits to trash cards is just going to be good in a lot of matchups right now.
Yeah, almost every deck you come across is like gonna force you to trash, I don't know, like 5 to 10 assets. So like if you trash five, assets that like where you get your 3 wizard credits, that's just $15. That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty good. All right, so V, where do you want to start as far as discussing this deck? Do you want to start with the Breaker Suite, or where do you want to go first?
Yeah, we could talk about the Breaker Suite. But first, I think I should say that this deck originally appeared. Simon Moon made it and published it on Netrunner DB. He won a store champ. That version was using Magnum Opus. And then when I heard of the deck, Chris M on YouTube, he was using it without Magnum Opus to kind of overcome some of the memory issues you can run into.
Right.
And then from there, I kind of like thought there's some cards that I would play differently in the deck, so this is my own little twist on it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And there's definitely been a couple of It's interesting to see how this archetype that's come up has already had a couple of permutations, and it's really only been on the scene for like a couple of weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Ever since Frantic Coding came, actually, like I think it even waited a little while after Frantic Coding came out for people to start really playing with it because it's not like a card that's just
It,
obvious or slots quite exactly into existing archetypes.
and it's also a really dangerous card, just from like I'm saying it. This isn't something you just like slot into a deck. Is
For
what I
sure,
guess what I'm
yeah.
saying.
And
Like,
even in this deck, I think you don't want to just play it all the time. Like if you get in your opening hand, you're like, oh, maybe I'll get a breaker. It's like, well, maybe you don't want to do that all the time.
yeah, the first time I tried playing one of these decks, I had one in my opening hands, and I was like, well, it's the reason for the season, and I just hit
Yeah.
no programs, zero programs. It felt
Yeah, that's the
terrible.
worst feeling too. That's only happened to me once so far, is not getting anything.
Do we
It's like
have?
I just paid 3 to trash 10 cards.
Yeah, it's really bad. Do we have a answer as to the interaction between this card and Page Piper?
I heard it does work, that weird way where it's like because you're just looking at the cards on your stack here, technically you haven't trashed them yet. Page Piper says like when you install a card, you can get the other copies out of your deck and discard them, and then shuffle your deck. So like these cards are still being looked at. You shuffle all those cards back into your deck
Right,
theoretically.
because
So
there's you're
theoretically,
looking at them, but they're still technically part of your stack.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know if that's really worth going into very much,
no,
but
but
it's certainly interesting.
yeah.
It's an
So
interesting mechanic thing.
let's talk about the Breaker Suite. We've got Black Orchestra, and Black Orchestra is a really neat card. And its illustration is done by one of my favorite Netrunner artists,
Ah,
Adam
yeah,
S.
Doyle.
Yeah. So it's got good numbers on it. It's a 3 for 2. It's a code gate breaker. It installs from the trash. It's 3 for 2 strength and break up to code gate. 2 code gate subroutines. Certain ice. This thing's incredible, and other things, it's nightmarish.
Yeah, I feel like without Data Sucker or NetReady Eye support, like often you don't want to use this too much, but it's there like if you needed to get through a Lotus Field or whatever kind of gear check stuff. And, it's just flexible and good. It's not like what you always want to be using, but sometimes you just got to pay for it.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely needs support, but luckily, as Anarchs, we have support for it.
Yeah.
So we got Faust. I hear Faust is pretty good, based on the
Yeah,
complaints I hear.
Yeah, Faust is basically here just to be like another like my whole idea of playing this like variant of Temujin Whisper basically is like I just want to get past all the gear checks, which is like a big way you lose. Is like you have a gear check at the wrong moment and then they stick a sand and bad things happen and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm trying Faust. You could also do David or like another Fem or something in the slot. Like there's a lot of slots in this deck I think people can play around with, but I'm trying Faust out right now. I also like that the additional value you can get, like if you have a Conspiracy Breaker in hand, you can throw it in the garbage and break a subroutine. It's like
And
you're
then
getting
bring it
paid to
back.
put that thing in the garbage right where you want
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah.
save a click from ever installing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it has a lot of things going for it in this kind of build.
Well, it's also worth noting that in certain matchups, again, one of the reasons why Faust is good is Anarchs tend to play a lot of copies of things. But in certain matchups, you have cards that you don't need multiple copies of, right? Like
Yeah,
if you've already got one Data Sucker down, you might not ever need the other one if you've already
Yeah.
got Grimoire. So you might as well have Faust to feed
Yeah,
those cards into something.
that's something I've always loved about Faust is just getting in value from your duplicate cards. Like that was a big thing in Noise back in the day when you were
Absolutely.
playing Faust and Noise. It's like, oh sweet, my second Aesop's like that can go. That's an easy discard.
Right, or your extra copies of Wild Side.
Yeah,
Because it's just like
exactly.
they're blank. We have a Singleton Femme Fatale.
Yeah, some versions use 2. She's just super good with Retrieval Run, which is a great way to get breakers out. She's not bad as a Frantic Coding target either. You still get a 5 discount on her, so you pay 3 for Frantic Coding, then you pay 4 more, so you pay 7, so you get a slight discount.
But
Uh,
if that's what you need right now, then
yeah, and she's a nice little thing. It's like, oh, I've got Kamainu or Toll Booth or whatever kind of thing you need a Fem effect for occasionally.
Yeah. It's just a solid card. Yeah, and it gets a lot
Yeah.
better if you're running Retrieval Run.
Yeah, and then also like her as a breaker is like totally fine most of the time in this sort of deck where I have multiple ice carvers and then I'm ready to set up Data Sucker and Net Ready Eyes.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, this is the new card I'm trying. This just came out. It's basically kind of like what I was saying about Black Orchestra. I think the numbers are slightly better on this, especially because the thing that this deck excels at is manipulating the strength of ice and the strength of icebreakers, and that's really the big downside is that it starts at 1, but otherwise, 3 credits for 2 subs and +2 is not bad on like sentries, I find.
Yeah. I mean, and if you've got an Ice Carver down and, you Net Ready Eyes this, breaking an Assassin for 3 credits feels pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad for sure.
Yeah. It's very interesting, this deck. I'm excited to see us play it just because, like, people have kind of moved away with all the Temujin from, like, a lot of heavy ice manipulation to just efficient breakers. I like that this deck moves back towards the, let's do Anarch garbage and, like, manipulate your ices a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It really plays with the strength. It's just so strong. Like now there's like a lot of big code gates and stuff. So like in this deck you can like pump up your Yogg or Black Orchestra, and then it's just like I never need David or anything. Like just blank like a lot of giant code gates that are seeing play now, like Mausolus and Fairchild and DNA Tracker.
Oh, yeah, some number of fair children are in
Yeah.
those purple decks.
Mostly 3.0, but
Yeah. So we got Clippy. I would
Oh,
say
yeah.
from an efficiency standpoint, Clippy is the standout in that.
yeah, Paperclip's just insane. It's ridiculous. It's so crazy. There's no reason not to play it in like an Anarch deck, period, and especially in a deck like this that is already has a lot of support for Conspiracy Breakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got Yogg.
Oh yeah, Yogg's still probably one of the most busted cards in Netrunner, I think. It's so ridiculous to just blank ice, and then like all the support too in this deck for manipulating ice strength and icebreaker strength. You can just get max value out of Yogg.
Yeah. So we got 2x Data Suckers.
Hmm.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty
you
good.
want to see them earlier on. I see some versions of this deck play 3, and I think that's totally fine. You really want this early on to just turn on your other breakers. Like you don't want to have to pump like Black Orchestra like 3 times or whatever.
Yeah, no, if you get into those situations, because I've been putzing around with this, as I mentioned, when you get into those situations where you have to, like, hard pay with Black Orchestra, it can get pretty nightmarish, like, how much money you're spending for some of these code gates.
Yeah, the other nice thing too, it's like just the classic Anarch thing, where it's like a lot of the time you can even get around like having to install like an icebreaker like type if you just like keep destroying like, oh, I'll destroy every code gate or every barrier I come across, and then I never have to take that tempo hit of hitting up Clippy or Yogg or anything.
That's true. So
And,
we got
early Data Sucker turns that on, so.
we got medium, because you're gonna. That's the other thing I think is worth mentioning, and that's 100%. That's a great point to make. Data Sucker's big thing is Anarchs, we're coming out of the gate pretty heavy. So, unless somebody's willing to take a tempo hit to purge Data Suckers, the second you've got like 2 or 3 on this, a lot of the problematic early game ice, you're just going to be able to evaporate with a Parasite install.
Yeah. And you're
Especially,
usually ready to face check those, like with the Conspiracy Breakers or Faust or something else. It's like, oh, I can, pay a little bit up front, but now it's up, and now I can Parasite it and deal with it however I need to.
right. And I would say one of the other things is just that in the current scenario, not a lot of people are playing CVS anymore. It's starting to come back a little
rarer.
bit.
I think it's a really strong include in a corp deck right now because medium is like the #1 way corps are losing.
Yeah. But it's not as prevalent as it once was.
Yeah, definitely not.
Look at it. There's a lot of Adam S. Doyle in this deck.
Yeah,
He's on
yeah.
a lot of really good Anarch cards.
A lot of viruses and that kind of stuff, I guess.
But yeah,
medium's just medium's so crazy too.
it's so
insane.
good. And it'll always be with us, V. It'll always be with us.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I feel like this is an amazing example of a well-designed card because it gets better the more you use it. It's not as strong immediately. It
Yeah.
requires support. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I don't know. I think it's maybe a little too good. Like, if you think about it from the corp side, it's like, all right, now the runner is in a situation where they have tons of medium counters. So I need to first, like, really shore up R&D. Then I need to take an entire turn to purge. And then they might just, like, knock my ice back down again with, like, ice destruction and stuff. I think it's, like, kind of maybe too good, honestly. But, yeah, it is, like, there's definitely counterplay and stuff. Like, you mentioned CVS. There's stuff you can do.
yeah. And we got 2 parasites.
Oh, yeah. Third Parasite is also something you can play with. Like the influence is super. Like I'm changing it like every day. This is just where I'm at right now. I'm pretty happy with this version, but yeah,
Yeah.
getting a third Parasite definitely has a lot of value because you want to get two as soon as you can to get those really money deja vus with like two Parasite is always the best deja vu.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always good. It's really solid. And Parasite's just a good card because if you put it on a must tax piece of ice like a toll booth, you're basically guaranteeing a purge like once every 4 turns.
Yeah, yeah. Or
Uh,
my favorite play is always like with Grimoire out, you install a data sucker, you install a surprise ice carver, and it's like, oh, I suddenly have, strength reduction out of nowhere,
yeah,
and I'm just gonna go snipe it.
that's also true. So that's Program Suite, looking very old school on a lot of fronts, and also having the new conspiracy breakers.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to go to what section do you want to go to next?
Let's talk about the resources. It's super standard. Daily cast is really good.
Yeah, it's good money.
Uh, I
Ice
have two
Carver.
Ice Carver. Like a lot of standard two
I
Mugen
love this
decks
card.
only play one, but I think it's super vital in this deck. And you might just mill it to Frantic Coding, and you're not super happy to Deja Vu for Ice Carver, but you can do it a lot of the time and be happy.
I'm so excited that you have this card in this deck. I love Ice Carver. I've always.
Oh, Ice Carver is like the scourge of the meta. I think like I played a Foxfire recently in an RP deck I was trying out, and I was like pretty happy with it. Just sniping Ice Carver and Netmarker.
Yeah, it's good. So we got 3 liberated accounts.
Yep, you need money, so
Money's
it's
good.
just like there's so much it's so much money in one card. It's hard to say no.
Yeah. And then
But speaking of
the
lots of
real
money in
scourge
one
of the meta.
card, yeah,
Yeah.
seriously though, it's just like Temujin contract rewards you for collecting your data suckers, building your mediums, doing all the things you want to do anyway. It's like a way to pressure archives as well. Like it's so insane. Why is
It's
there 20 credits on one card?
I don't know. It should really have like 3 influence on it.
It, yeah, I would not be unhappy if they like changed it to 4 influence criminal card or something.
Yeah.
It's
But
there's no reason not to play it now.
yeah. I mean it's so good. There's nothing else you can splash for that's going to give you that much money. Ever.
Yeah, like Steven and I were joking about it. Like you never see Lucky Find splashed anymore.
No, cuz
You should just play Temujin.
yeah, cuz why? Why would you ever do that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I could get 6 credits. Like, oh, I could get 16 credits from this card,
Yeah.
and maybe more if career fair it or whatever.
So, we are very program heavy.
Yeah, like you kind of like you want to be a little program heavy in this deck because you don't want to play frantic coding and get nothing. You'll be really sad.
Yes, you will be very sad. So,
Yeah.
on that note, we do have 2 grimoires,
Yeah,
which
Grimoire is the classic crazy console, right? It's the first 3-2 console, which is always super good. And then you just have so many ways to like you have 3 Deja Vu in this deck, so you're gonna get tons of virus value out of reinstalling mediums and data suckers and parasites. So
also it may have a quote from Whizzard on it, but this is
oh yeah,
totally
yeah, it's
not.
thematically appropriate too,
Yeah,
of course.
but it's totally Noise's console.
Uh, but turntable.
I know, I know. I always make the joke where it's just like, oh yeah, oh yeah, it's Wizard's console. It's like, is it though?
Like Wizard's kind of like the generally good Anarch, I guess. So
That's such a crazy thing to say. And I know if it's for all the meta reasons that we've discussed, but I just think about how panned he was. And then it's just like now he is the Anarch. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I think though also like if you look at all the other Anarchs, like they all have like pretty niche things they do.
yeah. So we've got Net Ready Eyes, which is not a surprising include, but an interesting one. So
Yeah,
talk to me a little bit
I
about
haven't seen
this.
another Frantic deck play with Net Ready Eyes. It's obviously it's just so good. Like we all knew like when this card came out, it's like, oh my god, Yogg can now break Lotus Field. That's insane. It is a little tricky to pull off in this deck sometimes. Like, you're gonna mill it with Frantic occasionally. This is a deck where you really value the cards in your hand, I found. So like you have to be wise about when you play this, but also with the three I've had worse, like you can get a lot of value from installing this as well. Like you get paid you get paid cards to install it. That's always a super good feeling.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true.
yeah, and it just kind of fits in with the theme of, like we have a lot of stuff that manipulates the strength of ice, and this is like a way to manipulate the strength of the icebreakers.
Yeah.
Basically just helps you abuse Yogg. So
Yep. And we got Plascrete because I hear boom is a thing.
yeah, I always like playing one Plascrete in Anarch now, just because like, if you're playing against Boom, you can always Deja Vu and get your Plascrete back.
That's also true.
So it can be multiple Plascrates if you need to be.
All right. So going up to events, we have career fairs, which makes Temujin and Liberated way better.
And Ice Carver, and
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
all the resources I have are all career fairable. So like for max value.
For max value. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a solid card for one influence. Why not?
Yeah, it always feels good to like inject and get a career fair and a resource you want a career fair. Like, and then you're like, oh, I also don't even have to discard.
Yeah, it feels good. And it's worth noting that one of the interesting side effects of this deck is if you do hit Frantic Coding and you hit a lot of programs, then you now know that you can inject just for like resource and event value.
Yeah, I think that's one of the skills I had to work on when I was picking up this archetype is like knowing when to inject and knowing when to I've had worse and knowing when to frantic coding, like based on what you want.
Yeah. So we got 3 Deja Vu. We were talking about that multiple times. It's just a really solid Anarch card, and there's so many things that you could get in this deck.
Yeah, and this is just like the perfect deck to play three of. Like a lot of normal Anarch decks, you only want to play one or two because like you don't want it until later in the game. But in this one, you want it pretty early on. And like even if you frantic coding like a Temujin in the bin, like Deja Vu for Temujin is not a bad play a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, if this deck does what it's supposed to do, you're gonna be pretty rich.
Yeah,
So you can afford to
but you
Deja Vu
spend it
whatever
fast
tool.
too.
Yeah, that's also true.
Yeah.
So we've got Frantic Coding, which we've already discussed. For those of you who don't know, I will go over the card because it has a fair bit of words on it. It's 3. You look at the top 10 cards of your stack. If any of those are programs, you pick one of your choice. You install them, lowering their cost by 5. And then you trash the rest of the cards. So that's pretty good. But it's also very Anarch thematic because you're getting a really strong positive at the cost of deck milling yourself, which is something that's
Right.
been an Anarch thing for a while now.
Yeah. Advanced tip: never play this against personal or potential unleashed.
Yeah, pro tip. So we've got 3 Vive Head Worse. We don't really need to belabor it. It's a great card. It's damage protection that also doubles as an actual card of value that you would play.
Yeah, I haven't seen this in either of the Frantic Wiz decks that kind of inspired my version, and I'm just like, it's just such a solid card. One of the cuts I made was Salset Slums to get this card, but I think you'd rather just try to get that early start with like Temujin and stuff, and rather than rely on Slums. Like you can just have a lot of money and be Whizzard and usually beat CPM.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I've had worse also like helps you keep your gas going. Like oh I need to get my next big money card or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've always felt that way. When I played Noise for a long time, I would frequently use I've Had Worse as a deck accelerant. We got 3 Inject. Inject's a really solid card. Draw 4. Trash all programs. Gain 1 for each program trash, and you draw everything else. Very situational when you play it, which is something you definitely have to learn if you're playing Anarch.
I think with this deck you can usually play it pretty much whenever, unless you're like, I need to draw a program very specifically. But oftentimes, you're very happy to mill your programs because like you're like, oh, I need a breaker half the time, or I need like medium, and you're like, oh, I can mill medium and parasite, and then like deja vu them both back for value.
Right. It's also worth noting that this card was a lot better when clone chips weren't on the NWL.
Yeah, I've played with versions of this deck that have like a clone chip or whatever, but it's just like I don't like paying like 3 influence or like a card in this deck that you might not ever get to play.
That's true too. So we've only got 1 retriever one. So this is where another place where your deck kind of deviates from some of the other Frantic.
Yeah.
Most of them are running 3 of them. Talk to me about the 1X retriever run.
It started as a 3 of, then became a 2 of as I was trying to get stuff in. And then like with the addition of MK Ultra, I found like I wasn't really needing it too often, and I'm trying 1 of. It's something it's like a nice to have a 2 of. and it's something I would definitely be looking at if you want to play around with this archetype. But I've been playing with one and finding it okay.
Okay.
Like, there's like with only one fem, like you only that's like the only like really really money like retrieval run target in the deck. You know, like for super big values like oh 6 discount or whatever. You know,
Right.
plus whatever you break, but you're also collecting maybe Temujin and Data Sucker while you're running. And you even this is a way to dodge CVS, which actually has a lot of value.
That's also true because
Yeah,
you don't actually access any of the cards. Yep.
right. Yeah. No, this is definitely like a card like I would like it to be two of, but I would more like to have 45 cards in my deck.
Yeah. I'm so undisciplined when it comes to that when I'm testing. So many of my testing decks are 46 cards.
I think this is like, I think it depends on the deck. Like, there's some decks that can get away with it, but I think there's some decks that very much rely on like they put all this work into like making the deck consistent, like cards like this. And I feel like that's kind of what this deck wants to do with Frantic Coding is just be more consistent, not
Right.
get locked out and like trying to dig for breakers and stuff. So I felt like I wanted to keep it at 45 for this specific deck.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And then we got Sure Gambles. I hear money's really good in this game.
Yeah, I really debated about putting this card in for about a millisecond.
Yeah. So that's the deck. I mean, it's got a lot of straightforward pieces that work the way Anarchs have worked for a long time, but it's combining them together in an interesting way and using some of the new breakers, which have kind of weird strengths, and then bringing back a lot of the ice manipulation to make them more efficient. I really like it. Think let's take a look and let's see how we do. For everybody watching at home, if you're not already familiar, as I mentioned earlier in the show, check out the Source podcast. V, do you want to let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, so we're on Podbean, which is like the primary place that I go to, host the podcast. If you type in the source, the Android Netrunner podcast, we're there. We're on iTunes, same thing. Type in like Netrunner in the source. We're also on Facebook and Twitter.
Cool. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
We will see everybody watching at home in the test run, and until we see you again, always be